Cool. Can everybody hear me okay? Yes. Brilliant. I see some nods.
Yes.
Okay, so I will start. Thank you and good morning. Welcome to our webinar today. So today we're going to be talking about crisis management, specifically for charities. So we've got three great speakers lined up. So we've got Michael Green from our large loss team here at Zurich, Nina Dillon from Keogh's, one of our panel solicitors, and Jesper Glacius from Zurich Resilient Solutions. So a little bit of how the session will run today. So you'll notice that your speakers and your microphones are switched off, but the Q&A function is switched on at the top. So if you think of a question throughout the session, please pop it in and we'll spend some time at the end of the session answering them. So the speaker sessions will last approximately 50 minutes with 10 minutes for Q&A. The session today is being recorded, so once it's available, approximately a week, it will be sent out to you, so you can share with your colleagues. So I think I've covered everything. So I will now hand over to our first speaker, who's Michael Green.
Morning, everyone. Hopefully you've got glorious sunny weather where you are too. So my name's Mike Green. I manage one of Zurich's large loss personal injury teams, and today I'm going to talk to you quickly about Zurich's policy response, because it's an incredibly key area. So if we can go to the first slide, please, Andrew. So I've drafted three quick slides, which will be shared post expiry of the call today, which detail employers' liability, public liability, and motor. On each slide, you'll see reference to the cover, cost expenses, corporate manslaughter, and an additional secondary extension to the policy. So for the EL, it's the health and safety at work defence costs. So focusing on the coverage section, the insuring clause. So I just want to make everyone aware on the call, especially those that may be new to them, haven't had a large, significant, major incident occur, maybe a fatality, that within Zurich's policy, the product that we sell to you guys, there is cover not only for any potential personal injury claim that may materialise, but also for potential regulatory, criminal actions that may be advanced. So under the employer's liability, you'll see reference on the second line in the coverage section, insuring clause, that the insurer will indemnify the insured in respect of all sums which the insured may become legally liable to pay as in damage in respect of injury caused within the period of insurance. So the key word there is may in what we look at. So why I say that is key. So you could have a major incident where someone suffers, a significant injury. They maybe fall from height, they've tripped over and on the pavement outside or within your premises, and suffered, significant injuries, life-changing injuries. We all know the policy will respond to the personal injury element. However, I think sometimes what is forgotten, that also there could be a corresponding action from HSC in these sort of incidences. So once you as the employer registers the matter via the RIDOR system, the HSC will assess it and make a judgment as to whether they make further inquiries. Our policy provides cover and underwrites the costs associated with that action. So if you've got a fatality, for example, you generally will always have a coroner's inquest or some sort of inquiry as a result. As such, it's incredibly important that you, the policyholder, the employer of the deceased, is appropriately managed, supported, and taken care of at what can be quite a difficult time dealing with something that is not the usual course of your employment. So this is just sort of the reassurance to say, look, Zurich has cover. Zurich can respond and assist you in these circumstances. As such, please do let us know at the earliest opportunity whether there may have been a fatality a major incident, where someone suffered significant injuries, please let us know the earliest opportunity in order that we can best protect your interests. Now, the reason I say this is because recently, we've come across a few scenarios where unfortunately significant incidents have occurred during the course of employment, where employees have suffered life-changing injuries. The HSC have got themselves involved and conducted investigations. Now, the policyholder hasn't referred the matter to Zurich. They've done what they thought was the best interest and done the right course of action in corresponding, linking in with the HSC, providing XYZ documentation because that's what the HSC have asked for. Then thought not much of it over the corresponding months thereafter, and then some 9, 10, 12 months later, the HSC would be back in contact to advise that they're formally looking to prosecute said policyholders. And obviously that can be quite distressing, quite worrying, and we want to avoid all that because in the disclosure of such documentation there is a possibility that you could prejudice yourself. Now Nina will talk about this in a lot greater detail in a minute. However, what I just want to get across, and whilst I've joined today, is I just want to advise all the attendees that there is cover in place. And please do feel free to just reach out to Zurich, even if it's just to ask on the happening of a major incident, a fatality, etc., what to do and what we can offer. As I say, you'll see on the screen there, under the cost and expenses section of the policy, we do pay for representation at coroner's inquests, fatal incident inquiries, and defending in court summary jurisdiction. Now, what we mean by court summary jurisdiction is usually magistrates' courts. However, Zurich, we take a very more pragmatic view. So whilst the cover says summary jurisdiction, we will equate that to both magistrates and Crown courts because we think it's incredibly important that our insureds are appropriately protected and supported, at this important time. So if we move to the next slide, please, Andrew. So this is the public liability. Again, you got the cover, the cost of expenses, corporate manslaughter, and the cost of criminal proceedings, which is just sort of the secondary cover that's available under the PL policy. The PL policy obviously provides cover to third parties that are injured or suffer property damage. Again, you've got the cost and expenses cover that's there available to you, and a slight difference or more broader cover that's available under the PL policy that's not under the EL is you've got not just a health and safety at work response, but also sections of the Food Safety Act and the Consumer Protection Act. So again, it's incredibly important, on the happening of an incident, an event, do let us know, because once we're in the process, and we've got lawyers instructed to assist on your behalf, you're able to benefit from legal privilege and potentially litigation privilege if a claim is likely to materialise because of an index accident. So it's very much within your interest to notify insurers at the earliest opportunity in order that we can coordinate and support you at this potentially difficult time and ensure that your business is appropriately protected when dealing with government public bodies. And then if we move to the motor slide, again, it's a high level overview of what the cover is, cover expenses, cost and expenses cover, and again, reference to the Corporate Manslaughter Act. So essentially what I'm trying to get across today, I appreciate I've probably repeated myself 2 or 3 times now, is please, on the happening of a significant event, do let us know at the earliest opportunity. Let's have a conversation and we'll advise you whether we'll take, whether it is one where we think, you'll benefit early from legal representation and we'll support you through the process. Likewise, if it's not, we'll advise you why and what steps to take in that scenario to move forward. So hopefully this is sort of a whistle-stop overview as to the cover available to you and the benefits of sort of Zurich's policy, you understand, you can take away and report, notify us of losses at the appropriate time as and when they materialise, so we can assist you. If I can pass over to Nina now.
Thank you, Mike. So good morning, everyone. Hopefully you can all hear me. So I'm Nina Dillon, and I'm going to be speaking to you about the steps you can take to respond to a crisis. And then I'm going to talk you through the types of regulatory investigation that you may face. So if we go to the next slide. Thank you, Andrew. So this just gives you an overview of what I'll be talking about. So I'm just going to start with a short and brief introduction to myself and KIOS. I'm then going to talk about, what happens when a serious incident occurs and the immediate steps that you need to think about, or the considerations. I'll talk a little bit about the legislation, just so that you're aware of the likely offences that may be investigated and what they mean to you as a business, but also how that imports into a police investigation or HSE local authority investigation. I want to talk to you about the regulators and their powers, again, because it all feeds into your interface with them, how you approach the investigation and how you protect it. And then we can have a quick sort of wash up with tactical considerations that we may not have addressed throughout that process. And then I want to end really by looking at some case studies and showing you how the matters that we've discussed today sort of impact on the way you deal with the cases from the outset. So just moving to the next slide then, if I may, it's just to explain a little bit about myself. So I'm a partner at KIOS. I lead the crime and regulatory team in our London office. So I've been specialising in the field of health and safety for 20 plus years. I have, throughout my career, represented individuals and organisations who face prosecution, investigation and prosecution for serious health and safety breaches. And my remit is to deal with cases that involve corporate manslaughter, gross negligence manslaughter, all the way down to technical breaches of organisations failing to have risk assessments in place, or issues that arise from workplace fatalities or other incidents working at height. So that gives you an idea of what I do. In terms of KIOS, we are a panel firm with Zurich, and as you can see from the slide, we work across the UK and Northern Ireland, so we're well placed to assist our clients wherever an incident may occur. And all the partners are proficient in dealing with crisis response, and you can see there the types of sectors that we cover. So it's there really to provide you with an overview of the capability of KIOS. So just then moving on to the next slide, if I may. So when you have a serious incident, you're going to be faced with a lot of pressure. So what are the immediate considerations that you as an organisation need to think of? And the purpose of this slide is not to create panic, if I can just make that clear, but it's just to give you an idea that when things happen, when it goes wrong, there's a whole host of pressures that you're going to face. And there's various considerations that you need to have in mind. And the slide is really to encapsulate those. So Mike's already picked up on one aspect, which is you've had an incident, who are you going to report to? One of the people that you need to think about are your brokers, who are pivotal in your relationship, and then also your insurers because of policy cover. When we're talking about serious incidents, we often sadly think about fatalities. So it's a question of then who are you informing of the incident? And that's both internal with the organisation, upward management and downward as well, but also then families that you might need to contact, and who's going to be best placed to do that. You have to think about which bodies will investigate. So when we're thinking about a workplace incident, if it's a volunteer that's had an incident in a triple way, if it's a motor incident, the key thing I just want to make clear is these are all criminal investigations. And I'll deal later with police powers and HSE powers, but your regulators are going to be the Health and Safety Executive, local authorities, but also for serious matters, the police, and they'll have primacy. So it's just having that in mind. It sounds a bit contrived, but I've got on there what the tactics should be. It's an awful incident, so you're dealing with the empathy to what's happened, but you also have to have in mind, how do I protect the business? So tactics that you put in play, all the steps that you take at the front of the investigation, very immediate considerations, honestly, they do impact how the investigation continues and where you end up at the end. And what I mean by that is, what may happen? Is it an investigation that stops and it goes to an inquest, or is it an investigation that goes further and leads to a prosecution? So, potential outcomes there. So these are all, the purpose of this slide is just to give an idea of all the things that very immediately you're going to have to think about. And the key thing that I mentioned there is documentation, because witnesses or documentation and witnesses, they're the key core points of any investigation. Right, so if we move on to the next slide then, please, Andrew. So police investigations, and then if we look at what the police are able to investigate, the police are there really when they have primacy, when there's been a serious incident, when there's been a fatality. They really take primacy of the investigation, because what they want to understand is, has there been a commission of a very serious criminal offence? And it's only the police that have jurisdiction to investigate for corporate manslaughter against an organisation and gross negligence manslaughter in relation to individuals. So for corporate manslaughter, you can see the content of the slide in terms of what they're looking at. They want to investigate how the activities of an organisation was managed. Did it contribute or cause a person's death? They want to understand, was a duty of care owed? Is it an employee, is it a volunteer? Is there a relationship such that there is a contextual duty there that arises that you have to safeguard that person's safety in terms of risks, avoiding risks? Is it the way in which senior management have organised the business that's led to the breach? And it isn't just a breach of duty, it's got to be a gross breach. It's so serious a failing that it falls way below the standard that one would expect of the relationship that's owed. That's what they're looking for. And I'm not seeking to go through that in this seminar to understand in finite detail the law. It's really to explain that if that's what their parameters are, that really explains why they're going to speak to key individuals and what about, what's the nature of the documentation that they're going to look for. And then the same applies if one looks at gross negligence manslaughter, and that's vis-a-vis an individual. So was there a duty of care owed? Was that breach of duty gross? And is it causative of the person's death? So that's in relation to the individual as well. So you immediately understand that when a serious incident occurs, it's not just an organisation that we're thinking of protecting, it's also individuals. So then thinking about how is it that you need to think about the police and their powers when you're thinking about interface. So if we move on to the next slide, please. Oh, sorry, forgive me. I should have said, and I knew this was going to happen. I've talked about corporate manslaughter. I've talked about gross neg. The other thing that we've got to be aware of in terms of motoring incidents, again, it's the police that have primacy, and what they'll be looking at is motor offences, so causing death by dangerous driving and serious injury by dangerous driving, which is a relatively new offence. But also, as you'll know, it's the causing death by careless driving that's come into place, and causing injury by careless driving. And that careless driving offences have really come in because there were cases that were being dealt with, are they dangerous or not? And then there was a gap in terms of, well, what about if it's careless driving? The danger isn't adjudged to be the level of driving isn't judged to be so dangerous, but it still leads to a death, then there is that hole in terms of the legislation. So that's why these offences come into place. So again, that's only the police that have primacy. So now moving on to police powers, which is the next slide. So as you know, the powers in which the police will execute their ability to investigate incidents all comes from the Police and Criminal Evidence Act, and they are swinging powers, as we all know. The police have the power of arrest, they can detain individuals, they can have the power of search and seizure, and they can undertake interviews under caution. And this is all to understand what's happened, why it's happened, who's responsible, and to gather evidence as they go. So it's important, this slide is important just so that you're aware that when you're the person at the coalface, you're having that regulator interface, that these are the powers they could apply. Now, I've worked in this industry for a long time. The police weren't sophisticated in dealing with health and safety workplace incidents, but they're getting much more clued up. So what used to happen is they'd be very hard-nosed, really apply their powers to get the information they thought they needed. Now, in some cases, they are a bit more able to listen to solicitors that say, well, hang on, you don't need to do it that way. Give us the documentation or the list that you need and we'll provide it. But it's all still a little bit of hit and miss. You know what it's like if with some regulators, if they're not quite sure about what they're doing, they'll go heavy-handed rather than do it in a softly approach. And it's just, I just use this slide to make it clear about what they can obtain and why it's important to have early legal advice in terms of managing those requests. Okay, so moving on to the next slide, in terms of the charitable organisations and the areas of work that you focus on, it's more likely to be the local authority that will investigate if it's a health and safety matter, and rather than the HSE. So local authority will be environmental health officers, but if the health and safety are involved, it will be HSE inspectors. Now, just making it clear, until such time as the police, so if there's a fatal incident, the police will be involved first. They will retain primacy. Now, they can carry on investigating a matter, but under work death protocols, they can call on assistance from specialist bodies, such as the Health and Safety Executive and local authorities. So you'll have a joined up investigation. If the police decide, well, okay, we're going to step away from this because it's more a health and safety matter, or it comes under that safety legislation, then it will be the HSE or the local authority that take primacy. She'll either end up with a conjoined investigation, or you'll end up with it being passed over to health and safety and local authorities. So just a quick comment about health and safety. They're very experienced investigators, inspectors that deal with these matters. They're proficient in terms of what they want to understand what's happened, and they make targeted requests for information. They make targeted requests for access to individuals. With local authorities, I'm sure you're all aware of press budgetary issues for local authorities. So in terms of their environmental health officers, they cover wide areas. So they are not as specialist as health and safety inspectors. And that can be good and bad. So it can be good in that local authority EHO officers are a bit more pliable to our requests or the way we interface with them. And we can sort of manage them in terms of information requests or witness requests. Or they go completely the other way. They're quite hard-nosed, thinking, well, I don't want to make a mistake. I'll just do it all by using and executing my powers to the highest level. So that's just something to be aware of. The purpose of this slide in terms of the legislation you see is that I just wanted to give you an overview of what sort of sections or parts of the Act that you're likely to be being looked at when the HSE or local authority investigate. So the overarching powers are those that appear under Section 2 and Section 3, which basically is a duty on an organisation, employers, to safeguard those who are in their employ or not in their employ from risks that may arise. So it effectively captures everyone. So that's the overarching legislation. I've put in there reference to management of health and safety at work regulations. I say Reg 3, it's also Reg 5, where it's the way you manage your systems. And also I've put in there work equipment. It's just to give you a flavour of subordinate regulations as well. And there's obviously work at height. But really, if one looks at Section 2 and Section 3, they cover employees and non-employees. That's where it's going to stay. And then the subordinate legislation can be relied on to support thereafter. So that's the sort of framework that the health and safety cases will look, or those regulators will look at. So we now move on to the next slide, please, Andrew. And that's a similar slide, but gives you an indication of the powers that health and safety and local authority can utilise. And it's similar, you'll see, but in some ways they go further. So they can enter premises without a warrant and inspect. They can also interview under caution, but they can compel individuals to give an account. So under what's called a Section 20 power of the Health and Safety at Work Act. And if an individual is asked to attend an interview under Section 20, then they are compelled to give an account. So that's one main difference between the police and the HSE. HSE local authority have powers also to search and seize documentation. But one key difference is that these regulators, health and safety local authority, aren't entitled to take away original documentation. They can't do that. They are entitled to take copies, whereas the police will take the originals. And that's really important because if you're dealing with a matter, you've got local authorities, officers coming in and asking for documents, you want to be able to at least retain a copy or retain the original and provide a copy. And I had this matter in a adventure playground where there'd been a fatal fall from height, and the local authority officers had come in saying, well, we want to take away all the documents. I was there at the site and said, well, no, hang on a minute, that's not your jurisdiction. You can take copies and you're going to have to wait whilst we make copies. And that's important because then as an organisation, you're able to understand what have they taken, what have we given, because later when you're looking at your own internal investigation, that comes into play. Also with local authorities and health and safety executive, they're able to issue enforcement notices. And that's because part of their remit is to mitigate down risk. So if there's a risk that's likely to eventuate, they are responsible for dealing with that. And they can do so by instilling or invoking an enforcement notice, an improvement notice, which says what steps they think the organisation needs to take to ensure that the risk has been mitigated. Or they can issue a prohibition notice, which says, right, all of that activity's got to be stopped until such time as they're assuaged that the risk has been mitigated. So the reason I raise that, it's with all the other things that are happening that a crisis can raise, we're also going to have to potentially deal with an improvement notice or a prohibition notice, and that affects how you run your organisation. So again, it's very much more about what steps you need to take, what things are you thinking of that may happen and how do you deal with them. So if you're thinking of appeals, etc. So moving then into the really the approach to the investigation, which I think is the key aspect here for why I really wanted to talk to you today. So as I said from the outset, and you saw those considerations that you're going to have to look at, it's really important how you approach your investigation, because as I say, and forgive me for repeating myself, but what you do at the day one will impact how a matter will be investigated and where you end up at the end of the investigation. So in terms of a crisis happened, it's really important, as I've said already, to notify your brokers, notify your insurers to make sure you're properly represented. Mike's already advised that you've got cover in place, so why wouldn't you use it? Some of my clients, and these aren't what the police would refer to as career criminals. They're not. You're organisations that are getting about your daily lives. You don't know this area. You're proficient and expert in what you do. So why wouldn't you call on lawyers that deal with regulators all the time? And by doing so, it isn't in some way suggestive of the fact that you've got something to hide. Well, no, it's just evening the playing field. So getting legal teams in place is really important. And that's also because when we're involved, we can cover an investigation from day one with legal privilege. And what that means is that you don't have to hand over the findings of the investigation between ourselves and you to any authority. And so many times, and this is the point that Mike was making, clients will think, well, okay, well, let's just deal with this. And then when something happens, i.e. we're notified of a potential prosecution, that's the point that we'll tell insurers we'll get some support. It's all too late at that time, because what you'll do is what everyone does when they're trying to help an investigation. You'll hand over documents. You may say things which you didn't really mean in the context of the incident, but now the police have them, or the HSE have them, or the local authority have them, and suddenly this case, which was going to be manageable, isn't so manageable. So putting legal privilege over it isn't to not assist, to prevent you from assisting in an investigation. It's just managing the way you do it, and at the same time protecting the organisation. So that's why I always say try and get legal advice straight away for that legal privilege. It also means that you can have time. It injects that sense of calm. So you can think, well, okay, this is what we found out. We can anodise a factual investigation report, and share that with the local authorities. So you're cooperating, you're assisting, but you're doing it in a much more skilled way. And it isn't as if, I certainly don't have this practice, but I know that you're proficient at what you do. So when I cover investigations with legal privilege, I ask you to carry on then with how you would normally investigate. So it's very much, it isn't me taking away what you would normally do, it's me supporting. And some clients will need more support, some will need less, but it's just doing it in that manageable way. So my view is very much, you've also got an incident you're responding to, you've also got a business to continue running. So that's why I asked for a lead person to be nominated, or a core team who can deal with police the regulator interface, who can provide me with instructions, or my team. Somebody who can claim documents, somebody who can identify witnesses. So it's either one person or it's a team, a small team, because with the legal privilege, you want to keep the team relatively small, because otherwise you'll lose legal privilege. So that's really the point of doing that up front, and then we come in and support you. Then it's the provision of documents. As I say, the police are able to take away original exhibits, but then you're entitled to a list of what they've taken. You provide that to the legal team, and then we'll understand where the investigation's going. If we're providing documents, it's always good to try and get a list of everything you're giving, or exchanging an email so we've got an audit trail of what's been provided. Because so many times we've been involved in investigations, the police have taken things, they haven't given a list of information, and things get lost. So where documents are king, we need to keep an eye on that sort of aspect. In terms then of the investigation, as I've already outlined, to understand what's happened, who owes a duty, has there been a potential breach, not only will the police look through documents, and if I say police, I mean let me just say regulators. I want to look at the documents, but they're also meant to interview key individuals. And that's where, again, your legal team will be able to support in that process, to explain what the police interview or HSE interview is going to look like. And also for us to be able to gather the information as well. So supporting in that way. And also, I'm able, if involved early enough, to say to the police or HSE, well, sorry, you've asked to see person X. Is that because you're looking to understand the organisation? Well, if that's the case, it isn't person X, it's person Y. And it's to do that so you don't have lots of individuals that are going to give interviews or statements, etc. So it's managing that process. And then in terms of representation and conflicts, I've got a case study on the motor case later, but sometimes if you've got the organisation providing information and there's an individual that may have be in a position where their breach of duty is being looked at carefully, it's an opportunity there to have a consideration of, or do they need a separate solicitor? Is that covered under the policy? And the way I deal with those matters is I'm open with the regulator saying, well, hang on, I'm instructed on behalf of the organisation. You want to see person X, well, you're going to have to hang on a minute whilst I look to see what representation they need. That's going to take a little bit of time. And that's where you then have that whole support of your organisation or individuals as well. And that gives us time to go back through the brokers and insurers to ask, well, is there cover for individuals as well? And do we need to set up a solicitor? And then I've said all of this, which is all really very much organisation-led, but we've also got to remember about the injured parties. What are the comms there in terms of how does one liaise or interact with the family? And these are considerations I come to, but in terms of the family, obviously we're human. We want to express them remorse for what's gone on, but it's got to be done in the right way. So it's not seen as an admission of guilt or responsibility, but you can empathise. Of course, nobody wants an incident to have. So again, it's managing that whole process through. Okay, so I know that's a bit of a whistle-stop tour, but hopefully that gives you an overview of the reasons why you need to be supported through an investigation. I touched on protecting the internal investigation, and in my view, the best way to do that is to call on your policy, get your solicitor instructed, and what I do is I immediately commission legal privilege, so it covers an internal investigation. I just want to make clear one point, that there is no legal requirement to do an investigation, but obviously one always does, because how else then will you know to assess your own responsibility? And it shows willingness to cooperate with an investigation from the regulators. But I just wanted to make that point. But that's the legal privilege. But litigation privilege, it's all to do with why a document was created in the first place. So as I say here, this applies where at the time the communication or document was created, litigation was in reasonable contemplation. You're worried about what likely offences an organisation may face. And it was created for the dominant purpose of the litigation. So if that's clear and you're already pulling things together, it's going to be covered under litigation privilege. But as I say, belt and braces is always to get your legal advisors involved. So if you are just waiting to hear if covers there, you see the tips at the bottom of the slide. Mark correspondence, reports or letters of instruction, legal privilege, litigation privilege. Always make sure that you're able to establish, if challenged, well, why did you do this? Why were you collating all this information? It's not just to investigate the factual scenario. It is because we were thinking about, oh, hang on a minute, there's a potential for litigation here, and that's why we did it. So I know I've said it a number of times, but you see why there's such a lot of moving pieces, why if there's support available, it's important for you to utilise that. So then moving on, and I'm conscious of time a little bit, so moving on to the next slide. So tactical considerations. So I've gone on about, regulator interface, what's their powers, how do you deal with them, what documents are you likely to give, what are they going to ask in terms of witness evidence, etc., and where that's going to end up. But also, alongside all that, you've got to think about media strategy. We're not, as we were when I started in the law, and this may give away my age, but mobile phones and all of that were just coming into place. But now anything happens, it's already snapped, pictures are up onto the web. So you need to be clear about media strategies. a one voice policy. So internal the organisation, so your own organisation, your staff know what's going on, but even more so externally. There's no such benefit in saying no comment anymore. What you need to do is keep a factual statement that you're assisting with the investigation, that your sympathies are with a family if it's an injured person, if it's a fatality. You also need to have that same interaction with stakeholders. And when I'm talking about stakeholders, it's everyone, including the Charities Commission, because of course you're going to have to update them when there's a serious incident, but it needs to be sanitised. And I've dealt with these matters where they want sufficient information, but it's got to be factual, and that it doesn't then in any way prejudice your ongoing investigation. So it's having that all in mind. And if you're thinking media strategy, that's where that falls into place. And also similarly with any other providers you interact with, because everyone will know, but it's careful to keep that one voice policy. Again, I've talked about, external regulator interface, but what about your own staff? That's just as important. These incidents happen, and it's awful for everyone. So think also about your own staff welfare. What support can you give them as an organisation? And I'm also clear, and I've also utilised the support that Zurich give, the free support line in terms of the counselling, which is really important, because this isn't a quick process. And that's the other thing I wanted to say. These investigations take a long time. They sort of have almost a roller coaster journey. There's a lot of energy, and then it goes quiet, and then it goes up and down. And say, for example, you're a manager that's been involved in this, you need that support in terms of how on earth are you then expected to go from the incident all the way through. So think about that and have that on offer. And in your partnership, obviously your insurers with Zurich, your policy with Zurich, it's available. Take advantage of that. I say all the nice thing, and then I say the next point on the slide is disciplinary investigations. Unfortunately, sometimes that is required in these investigations, and how that's handled also needs to be dealt with carefully. But ordinarily, your policies may say, well, look, if there's a serious matter, it's got to be investigated, and you'll have to start and then maybe pause that investigation. But again, it's important to have that interface with us so that we can assist on those matters. Okay. I'm really conscious of time, but I really did want to just hopefully it's okay with my other speakers to just touch base on some of the case studies that I wanted to look at. So you've heard about the tree incidents recently, which were in the media involving young child, but these are case studies that are taken from the sort of cases I deal with. She managed a stately home with extensive grounds open to the public. So your managers, you've got your own staff duty of care, you've got public duty of care. There's a tree that's thought to be at least 100 years ago. So a tree survey was last conducted several years ago. So what's happened is recent stormy conditions, dog walkers are passing under a tree, branch collapses, incident leads to fatality, several injuries. Police are at the incident location. Police are going to want to know who manages. Then if they are supported by local authority, you can see how very quickly they're going to want to know who's responsible, who's the senior manager, when was the last tree survey done, why was it left so long. You knew as an organisation there were stormy conditions. You might have done the survey a while ago, or what interim steps did you take to make sure that the stately home was in a condition which was safe for that to open to the public. You can immediately see the nature of the documents you're going to have to need, the questions you're going to be asked. And then it's a question of getting all of that in a usable format. So that happens very, very quickly. So to the next case study, please. Expedition is one that I've dealt with. Your charity organisation, got children involved, outward bound trips, somebody falls, hitting their head, no medical assistance available. So why isn't that properly planned? Why wasn't that risk assessed? whose responsibility was it to risk assess this? And, you know, I put it down at a minor level. That could easily sort of ramp up to a tragic fatal. So then you're going to get the media interest as well. It's going to be the police immediately. You're going to have local authorities asking similar questions. And then it's just a question of getting that information to them as quickly as possible. So then moving on again, please, Andrew, to road traffic collision. And unfortunately, this happens so many times. Staff members involved in a serious road traffic accident, others are seriously hurt. Somebody needs to have their leg amputated. So you can all see all this playing out in the media. Police are on the scene. They want to interview the staff member. They want access to vehicle records, including service and maintenance sheets. So you've got the organisational duty. Was the vehicle provided in a safe condition? Was it roadworthy? Has it had regular MOTs? Has it been properly maintained? Where are all those documents that all need to be produced? Then looking at the staff member, was he authorised to drive? Was the policies, etc. in place? Was he on the phone at the material time? What caused the incident? Is it something about driver error? They'll want to interview him. Do you need a conflict solicitor because the organisation is being asked to account for its duty to provide a roadworthy vehicle? What about the individual? What sort of offences is he likely to be interviewed for? Do you need, as I say, separate representation? So all of these things, when the police are investigating, when HSE are investigating, are, as we describe, very hot as soon as they happen. So the pressure comes on you guys to deal with all this. And that's where I say, have your solicitors involved, because as they say, if we're involved, it injects a little bit of calm for you. We're the ones that are interfacing. If the police, the regulators don't really get on with us, it doesn't matter, because we've got broad shoulders. We're looking after the innocent or the organisation behind us. We're helping them. So that's why I say, I've gone through all the way the regulators will investigate. You see what they're going to ask. You see the pressures that are going to be placed on you. That's why early intervention with your lawyers is important. So just moving on then to the last slide. Steps that can be taken to avoid or mitigate a prosecution. Because let's be frank, if it's considered by regulators that there is a breach of duty, there is causative breach, they're going to be looking to see what action is going to be taken. And sadly, in some cases, it does end up in a formal prosecution. But in terms of organisation, protecting your group as a whole, protecting individuals, my advice and takeaway to you is think about getting early legal advice. Not because you're being tricksy, because you're trying to get lawyers involved. It's because you're trying to manage the investigation in the best way. Provide the information you have to, because documents such as risk assessments, they don't attract legal privilege, because that's not the dominant purpose for which they were created. But getting those documents, explaining why that document was in place through early legal advice, puts you in a better position. And if you don't have it, explaining why, because there may be a technical legal reason why you don't have to have it. Nothing's changed, etc. So get the early legal advice. Make sure that there's controlled cooperation with the regulator, because you don't want to be in a situation where people are saying you're obstructing an investigation. The way we do it, police are less likely to say that to us. And if they do, we'll say, well, I don't think that's the case. As I say, this is what I do day in, day out. Your specialism probably doesn't lie in that area. So get some advice. Careful approaches to any interviews under caution, or what you say. And then another takeaway, there's no such thing when a regulator's involved as a off the record chat. That doesn't exist. Anything you say, everything you say will be recorded. And HSE are very good at having with their notebooks. The police don't bother with notes now. What they do is they just turn on their body-worn camera footage. So you can just imagine you say something in the heat of the moment, you didn't quite mean it in that context. Come down the line, it's prosecution. That's the video footage that's being shown. So just get your legal advice for that reason. The key also, it's important to end on this. This isn't all doom and gloom, and I'm really sorry if that's the impression I'm giving. I'm just trying to give you an overview of how these things play out. But if you take your time to have your documentation in place, think about your policies, procedures, think about how you're going to train those out. So you've got the policies, you've thought about it, you've got them in place, you've trained them out to staff. That puts you in a much better position if you've had an incident than not having it, or having a document but nobody knows about it. And at that juncture, I'm going to hand over to my colleague Jasper, who will be able to assist really with the support that Zurich can provide in terms of that risk management. Okay, so over to you, Jasper.
Thank you, Nina. So that was a lot of the what and the why, and we are here to sort of support you with the how as well. So I'm just going to go quite whistle stop on my only 2 slides so we can get to the Q&A as well. So after that with Nina, if you've got any questions, please pop it in the Q&A now, not the chat, the Q&A, and then we will get to that in just a moment. I sit in a part of Zurich called Zurich Resilient Solutions, and we provide support for organizations such as yours in a number of areas. Won't go into the detail of all of them, but just for this sort of case study, I would like to focus on sort of the overall strategic and tactical piece, more direct liability services, and also how we support within the motor area. So that would be the next slide, Andrew. As Nina rightly said, a lot of this comes down to being aware of what is going to happen, and then being prepared in those areas. So just the 3 areas that I just want to highlight where we can support, especially is in this area of business continuity as well, so that when you have an incident, you don't have to make all the decisions or figure out all of your structures all at once in a situation where you're under a lot of stress. You get a lot of questions. So having a business continuity plan in place that can illustrate what are the expectations within the organization already in terms of communication, who deals with what aspect of the investigation, who is empowered to make decisions, and who is leading on the response for the organization, as well as how do we keep delivering those services that are essential to our organization along the way. Sort of on more of the direct liability side, we've got consultants who have previously led investigations, such as what Nina was describing, both on the local authority side and the HSE side, and we also have former police officers within our consultants who know what those investigations look like. So they can help provide reassurance within your processes and guide as a critical friend in terms of where do you need to focus. They can provide training to your staff in terms of what is the documentation that they need, and explain why it's so necessary to have especially that kind of documentation and documented decision-making processes in case that something does end up going wrong, that you have that documentation that you need to either prove that you have done everything reasonably possible to avoid it, or that there was no negligence in your part as well. And just quickly on motor, our motor consultants can help provide a reassurance of, again, around your policies and what driver behavior, provide training around driver behavior and what do's and don'ts, and really emphasize why you shouldn't take certain actions. I know one of my colleagues in the motor team tends to get commission to come and scare employees with all of the examples he has encountered over his career about when and how and why things go wrong for drivers. And in addition, our consultants also work with telematics and cameras in cars and in your motor fleet to provide that evidence base for any potential investigations, but also to provide an accountability for drivers in general. I will leave it at that and leave 4 minutes for the Q&A, but happy to take any questions as well, either now or later on. So back over to you, Sasha, for the Q&A.
Thank you, Jesper, and yeah, thanks Mike and Nina for such insightful and interesting sessions. I've actually made an executive decision, and rather than rush the Q&A, I'm going to park the Q&A. We've got quite a few questions that have come through, so what I will do is I will collate them all together and get your answers, and then send it out to the audience in an email. And obviously, if people want to chat it through, then just let me know. But yeah, so I've said thank you. The last thing is we want your feedback. So this is one of the first webinars that we've done specifically for our charity customers. So I'd love to hear your feedback. If it yeah, if you thought it went well, if you want to hear about other subjects, let me know as well. But the QR code is on the screen if you want to scan and do that now, or again, when I send out the recording, I'll send out the link. But yeah, thank you for your time, and thank you for dialing in and spending an hour of your day with us.